The Noble Lord Alton for securing this timely debate, particularly in the context of the history of Hong Kong, and for the Noble Lord's typically powerful introduction, which is only what your Lordship's House would expect. I want to begin this final debate of 2024 with a big picture overview of the state of the world. Geopolitically, we are an unstable, dangerous mess. The climate is running out of control, overheating very visibly and obviously. Nature, biodiversity is in a state of collapse. Human lives, we're going backwards in poverty, hunger and inequality. We are not doing well. And that is not because we've been derailed from some ongoing train of so-called development and progress. It's a product of the nature of politics around the world in recent decades, particularly in the hugely influential United States and us with our own UK influences. It's a legacy of colonialism and neocolonialism, extractivism and exploitation, the enriching of the few at the expense of the many. Which is not to say that there hasn't been real progress in the decades since World War II, progress that has been driven by civil society, which has developed a framework of international norms, what we generally call human rights, which were not given over to us by states, but driven by campaigners that forced us forward. Civil society action has got us to that point, but it's dependent on government action to really put these into effect. And that means that governments have to apply these frameworks of norms, these human rights, apply the judgments without fear or favour, not to use them as a stick to beat the people we dislike and to quietly ignore what we see as our friends and allies are doing. And I have to say that I would love to see a debate in your Lordship's House similar to this one, focused on the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia, which is every bit as bad as China. Now, Noble Lords have here talked about, as I've done in other contexts, the situation, the horrendous genocide against the Uyghurs, the situation in Tibet, the situation in Hong Kong, the threats to Taiwan and in the South China Sea. I'm not going to go back over that ground because it's been covered very well already. I want to take two different angles here. One is to say, as no one has yet said, that in this complex world facing the threats of the planetary boundaries being exceeded, we do have to talk to China. On the climate emergency and nature crisis, they are crucially important actors. And of course, as a number of Noble Lords have pointed out, they make many of the products we use every day. That's the trade that the Noble Lady Baroness Lawler was just referring to. And we have to acknowledge that the responsibility for the environmental impacts of those objects we use rests with us, as well as with China. And we're going to see in the coming year a real focus on a duty to prevent human rights abuses and environmental damage for our companies, for our supply chain, and this is important to consider in this context. But it's really important to say that business interests, or indeed the need to talk about climate and nature crises, shouldn't stop us at every opportunity raising human rights in conversation with the Chinese regime, shouldn't stop us deciding on sanctions, shouldn't stop us providing refuge to those seeking asylum from the Chinese regime. Now, I think it's important to note that this afternoon the Prime Minister and the Liaison Committee, referring to safe and legal routes for people to find asylum in the UK, said he was happy that what we had now with Afghanistan, Ukraine and Hong Kong. A direct question to the Noble Lady, the Minister, surely we also want to provide safe legal routes for people from other parts of China who might be seeking asylum in the UK to be able to come here. Hong Kong is enormously important, but it shouldn't just be Hong Kong. Now, my second point is, I hope I've already used in all of my own words, the Noble Lord's question refers to China's actions and policy towards China. Now, that may indeed have been what the Table Office was happy to have, but I would urge all Noble Lords to not regard China as a single entity. China is not the Chinese regime. It's really important that we don't take make ahistorical orientalising assumptions about China as some unchanging monolithic entity. I note the Human Rights Watch, for example, has a whole series of reports about how there have been protests within China, terribly brave actions by people from within China at great risk to themselves. So let's not talk about China, let's talk about the Chinese regime and acknowledge there are Chinese people, not just within the parts of China we've identified, but other parts of China as well, who are taking action that we should be acknowledging. I note there are really brave feminist LGBTIQA+ activists in China who have paid a hideous price for taking actions in those areas. Finally now, however, changing tone. Given this is the final Green speech of the year, I want to particularly offer thanks to the staff who keep us going through these long and strange hours through which we work, and particularly to them and to all noble lords, to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Yeah.